Hello and welcome to Bug Free Productions. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, comment with questions, and subscribe for more videos and alerts, as well as stream times. Down in the corner here, we have our stream times listed. So we have Tuesday, 6 p.m. We have due code. Thursday is a variable stream, also at 6 p.m. And Saturday is art stream usually, but today we'll be going over some finishing touches on the tutorial for Brick Breaker, and we'll be looking at the last few things that I needed to finish up for this. So quick overview, Brick Breaker is basically a thing where we keep hitting the ball up to make points. So for that we needed bouncing ball, stage design, breaking bricks, and a round tracker, along with a game manager, which also functioned as the scorekeeper. And I'll show you guys that here quickly. So if we go over to the Unity part, looking at Unity, we can see a couple different things. So we can go and look at stage one. Save. I guess it was already open. So last video, we should have had everywhere from here to here working. The only thing I added to the brick was to add this points value. I just didn't want it to be less than 1. So, in the round manager, I edited some code that you can't quite see here. This isn't used anymore, so we'll comment that out. We'll look at creating the square canvas, which actually boiled down to more of a show you how that happened. But here are those warnings I was talking about the one time, where all I have to do is go and change my additional shaders to only include text channels and use vertex always. And that fixes most of those ones up. But with that, let's flip over to our Visual Studio. In our Visual Studio, let's start with our round manager. So what did I change about the round to fix the problem that's going on Thursday, not Thursday, Tuesday? Well, I'm not going to use this fix list anymore. And update has end round in it still every turn. The reason I wasn't getting a reference to my round manager was this line had game object and game object. So if there were any game objects in the scene, it destroyed itself, which is not what we wanted. I think it was either just because I was going too fast or I let it auto-complete too much, but it just didn't. Remove bricks is also not going to be used. What I ended up doing is having using the bricks dot length, so finding all of the bricks in the scene, and then checking if it's less than 1. If it's less than 1, it sets the canvas active. I did start using this canvas again. I'll show you what the fix is, why that canvas wasn't working. Actually a very simple fix, and it's probably shorthanded using prefab that might have prevented that problem. So now that that runs and sets the canvas active, before I go back, I want to show the new game manager type thing. So a game manager functions largely the same, except the team management responsibilities too. So if you remember, we had that in the would have been the canvas. So I pulled that code out of the canvas. I didn't want, let's see, pulled that out of the canvas script because I didn't really want it to be accessible there because I would run into problems later. With game ender, and basically game ender is a thing on the field where the cube, which is the bottom piece, has a game ender script on it, and that just tells us when the game ends. So, like if you, that would be like your out of bounds area trigger. And I use collision, but you could definitely use trigger or something else. It's just something to reset to the first start scene if the ball hits it. So the goal of the game is to keep that nice and good to condition. So if we go to this guy in our game ender, you'll notice it's just on collision, game manager.instance start scene. And that's where part of the reason why I started moving all that into the game manager. So if I expand my scene management section here, which I just create by doing region, scene management, and then end region here. Yep, right after start scene. It creates this nice little region that Visual Studio recognizes you can just open flows with a collection of code lines and public next scene. So this loads the next scene. We basically get what the next scene would be, check if it's still in bounds by using scene count build index. Scene count in build settings, which just tells you how many scenes are in the list is settings. And -1 keeps us correct. And then we load the scene at scene 0 because we're loading the start scene, which is pretty nice. Else, we just load the next scene, and if scene is equal to 1, we reset the score. This ensures that when we load the first stage every time, it resets the score to 0, so that we're not adding on to one continuous score, and it's different playthroughs, while still being able to display the score on the front page. Start scene is just loading scene 0, which we could call up here, but I'm just going to leave it as it is because it's working. Nothing changed in any of the other stuff. It did add a float player score. This is just an accessor it's used to get and return player score. The reason this runs is just because I had the other one protected so people could come in and add to it. How I think the player to add score, but I didn't necessarily want them being able to just up and change it. So that's like that. We went through round manager, game ender. So what's score display? Let's go over to score display, which is going to be in two places. So here was my idea. I usually like to put things on the top level of canvas and then link things down. So I had my text reference here and it just updated here. Well, why doesn't that really work? Well, because when you have multiple canvases in the scene, and then you have one with a panel, that panel will cover canvas that doesn't necessarily have a panel, and then it won't be able to click through. So that also includes rendering stuff below it, so it wouldn't render this text, even though it renders from top to bottom in a stack. So this one renders, then this renders on top, right? So if we look at that, that's going to cause a problem because eventually that's going to get covered when the game ends and you can't see your score, which isn't what you want. So the solution to that was you can see in this one, I just put it referenced to itself. So the score just does it by itself because it doesn't technically need any input or anything from Canvas. It can just update itself, which is good. It's just kind of, yeah, it's fine. And then button, um, yep. The main thing you have to remember is, since I had this turned off for development purposes, because this is supposed to turn on when the end condition is met. Um, since this is supposed to turn on when the end condition is met, you have to go up here and turn it on when you make changes to the canvas. For some reason, if you just drag and drop an object in here, like I did the text the first time, it doesn't set it up with the canvas and it won't display. So make sure your canvases are on when you're editing them. Not sure what that problem is, but it is a problem. Then we'll look at score canvas, or the score display. And all that is a couple serialized fields that you probably saw when you looked, if you looked in the inspector. We have a protected TMP object. So in order to use TMP, you have to use TMP Pro using statement. Then we grab protected temp text, score text. We have a serialized field that is a string for pretext and posttext. So that's just before the text and after the text, what we want to display. I defaulted to score equal like semicolon or colon and then points abbreviation. You could do that for anything, gold, whatever you want to do. And then we have start. So on start, we change score, which updates what the score is going to be. And then score text.pretext plus equal game manager instance object. So this guy updates, basically getting the information from our instance of the singleton game manager and getting the player score accessor. And then we have post text. So we're just concatenating some strings together here um, because this will become the string value when we concatenate it with strings. And there's one more thing in Game Manager I didn't quite have time to do, just because it was running a bit fast. So when we add score, we probably want to do a uh, finds, maybe it's objects of type, objects of type. That's going to be score display. Um, then maybe trying to think of what the least typing up version is for each score display in type and identifier. I'm gonna just call it an SD. In that, so then we gotta do the thing that we want for each of those objects in this array that we find. Well, what do we want to do? We just want to use the public method change settings, or not change settings, change score. And because it pulls from the game manager when it does that, we don't need to update anything here with a parameter. We can just use an empty method that was in score display. change score. And I call change score and start as well, just because if we load a scene, we want to make sure that score is current. And that just kind of sets us all up for some nice easy going programming. So, did we change anything else? Brick break, or brick breakable brick is, I just added a points value as one thing. And then in break, I added this line. So the game manager.instance.add score point value. So it's just adding its point value to the score when it's broken. Um, as you can see, when the brick is broken, like we created the other day. So we have that looking nice. Um, and that pretty much sums up how that works. Wasn't there one thing more that changed on that? There should have been on the canvas snap script. I changed it to just reference the game object, so load next scene no longer takes parameter. Since our game manager already checks to see if we're out of the index, I just kind of made it so it doesn't branch, isn't capable to branch anymore. It just runs in sequence on our builds based on our build settings. And then load start scene does the same thing. It just goes to game manager. It's, I don't really have any accessors for this class, so this one got simplified a lot. And the only thing I had to do to fix that was to go back into the Unity one and on the canvas on our button. When I change a method like that, it breaks the reference, especially since our reference originally had a parameter. So all you have to do is go through the drop down in Canvas nav and select the load scene. Just fix that. So it's not too bad. And you'll notice I prefabbed some things. Um, it's not really that necessary to prefab a bunch of things for this one, but one trick I might use is to just always make sure you have an event system in your replace input system. Yep. Make sure you always use the event system in every scene. If you try and invoke events, it might help as well. Um, but if you use something like Canvas, which uses the event system for on-click events, you really need to have that in the scene every time. That's why the one canvas wasn't registering any clicks. It was just because it didn't create it when I drag in the prefab of the canvas. It only creates it automatically when you create a new canvas. So if I went new canvas, um, and made a new canvas that way, it would create an event system if there's one in there. If I just drag in a canvas for my prefabs, it doesn't have the same effect. So that's just the way Unity's built. So with that, I did some testing, and that all that code and everything works. So that was the last bit of code, um, which wasn't much, which is why I didn't want to really do it as part of a live thing, or as part of live coding, because it was just a couple lines. So, and I'll just run that to show that it does work. So it spawns the ball, hits it, score points do display, start starts. I see. So you'll see stage one. So this is the do not destroy on load as the game manager. And you notice we never get extras. That's because our instance is something when it's created. So we no longer worry about that. So that's how that singleton works out. And it would have helped if I made my start menu a little bit looking different than the stage menu, but you can see the score change really quickly. So if I hit, so I'm at the start menu after one run, it's 8 points. So then I hit start, you'll see the score was 0 there for a second, and then it's just running very fast. Um, so with all these components running well now, only thing that would be left to do would be to kind of edit and pretty up this game a little bit. One way you could do that. So the reason I thought 3D would be because there's not a lot of 3D um, type of stuff when it comes to some of the simpler things like Tetris. They're all like, yeah, we'll just render it all in 2D and maybe frame it nicely a little bit because it's not a game that greatly benefits mechanic wise from 3D, but it is something that could be kind of cool visually for 3D. So if we go back to our camera um, and just turn off that orthographic view, that's kind of weird, right? But you could move it in just a hair. You could adjust your play area too and stuff. And then we can also play with the rotation. We can create kind of a different effects based on what we do with it. So we can look down at our paddle so that when our paddle moves around, we got like this downward angle. We could also do an up angle, different kinds of angles, and get some cool 3D effects and stuff. You could also make it slightly harder if you like moved the camera to one side and then looked down towards the center. That would be kind of a cool effect. It Making it in 3D just gave us some more options for what we can do, even though we technically did lock it to the Z so that it can't move along the Z axis. But that also creates some fun opportunities for designers and asset makers and other types of things there. Um, so I think that's it for the code part of this. For the next, uh, for the rest of this video, I believe I'm just going to go ahead and cover some pretty up aspects, like some of the probably some emitters, a little bit of texture stuff. Nothing too crazy, but just entering some of the simple stuff. Something that both programmers and Unity probably programmers and artists probably need to know and keep in mind when they're planning how to create assets for this. The first thing's going to be just how to use some, I think, emitters. Instead of screwing up anything in our scenes, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new scene. I create um, scene. So we create a scene. We're just going to call this like emitter test. Emit test. So what is an emitter test, right? Well, yeah, we'll need main camera probably. We won't need directional light. Um, project settings is not the right one. What was it? It was window lighting, window rendering lighting. And it opens on this screen for some reason. So what about lighting? Well, we want environment. I'm just going to turn my environment down to 0.8. That being, this might actually have some glow effect or some shine or something to it. Because I'm thinking on sticking with the glass for just the idea of it. So if we do that, and go to inspector. So what do we have here? So main camera, that's fine. Do I want to create an empty? Yeah, let's just create empty. Call this emitter or custom emitter, custom it for short. Then let's add a particle effect system. And there's a bunch of different things. It spawns in here with no texture by default. So let's think about that for a minute. What do we want to attempt to do here? Well, if I'm thinking about shards of glass, right? Which I always am. We're gonna want to create a material that'll render for that, correct? So in that materials folder, in render materials, we have this new material, which is, let's right click, rename ball. And then let's actually duplicate that, rename this brick, and just so you don't have things named all the same, maybe brick, brick RM for render material. That works pretty good. That's 175 opacity, 188. Oh, so 175 is even too light. Let's maybe go a solid 200. Maybe not. Let's try 175 and see what the lighting comes out to. The ball was pretty invisible, but this isn't the kind of game where we want it to be hard to see. So let's go ahead and just make these 200 opacity. Okay, so if they're 200 opacity, that's pretty good, right? Then we're gonna go ahead and I want to go to maybe duplicate that again. And that's the color I want it to be when it's solid, right? Well, let's rename this one again. Brick breaking render material. Okay, what then? So then we can go back to our custom emitter and we have some render materials, right? So first thing I like to do before I start messing with this, because this hurts my eyes to have these pink squares floating around. Let's go down to the bottom, go to renderer and check this out. I think I do mesh. That's only if I'm using a cube. Yep. So then you can use something like a cube, or sphere, or capsule, cylinder. Let's use cube. Let's use our breaking brick material. So now you'll see cubes render with that type of material. And it could be more transparent. Let's just go up in here and start messing around with what's 100 look like. 100 is looking pretty good. Maybe even go a little lower. because this is kind of a particle effect, or like a shattering effect. We don't need it to be really visible. Um, so then let's go ahead and look at emitters a little more. So here's some squares, or some cubes rather. This isn't bad, but is that really the kind of thing we're looking for? So one note to keep about particle systems is essentially they spawn all these objects and then delete the ones that aren't being used past a certain size, right? They do pool themselves, which is good and bad because the defaults are terrible. Um, but we'll affect that after we figure out what our emission rate is. So if we're using 3D physics, which will have to be, we want to look for maybe not the max particles, but the pre-warm is pretty nice. So instead of waiting for particle emission system to start up and start spawning, this one essentially warms it up beforehand. So before it starts spawning particles, it will have actually created particles, which enables it to seem as if it starts more immediately when a scene starts or when a action begins. So if you're doing like welders or something where you have a lot of sparks flying around and getting ready, you probably want pre-warm checked because you don't want the arc to go down and start the emitters. You want the emitters to be warmed up and ready to start when they go down, so that there's less delay. So start lifetime, start seed, pretty self-explanatory. What if we, um, for certain programming reasons, I don't use between two constants as much anymore. That's just because accessing emitters and stuff is kind of hard to begin with, and I haven't really found a way to change both of those, which means I'm not sure what it tells to change when you can only set one value in a place where there's two random values. So if you're planning on doing a bunch of stuff with the particle system through code, don't don't touch the multiple field areas. So that means like no between two constants and stuff like that if you're planning to have your programmer program it or if you yourself are programming it. Uh, Something I'd recommend even, yeah, just with my skill level, I wouldn't recommend it. So rate over time. So this is how many you emit over time. So pretty nice actually. Uh, Probably a bit much. Rate over distance. So rate over time and rate over distance. This would be if you wanted to create like a sparking trail, that would work. Moving around. Rate over time, this is more like just constant emission like you see here. We turn that down to 0 and turn this up to, I'm gonna leave it at 10 so we can see it. You'll see as I move it, it emits. And there's more cool things we can do with that. Um, but for this example, there's not really a lot that would, well, the paddle might be fun to do that with. Let's stick with the breaking brick. So breaking brick effect, right? Start lifetime size, flip rotation, modifier, emission. So what's the shape? So we can change what our shape of emission is. Donuts, pretty common. We didn't change our emission back. So donut emits at a random angle from around this circle. That's not bad for what we would want for our breaking bricks, right? So, but I'm sure there's better ones. Circle, that's a bit flat, isn't it? Hemisphere, which is half of a sphere. It's kind of cool. Not, well, actually, if that was plain in terms of just shooting stuff at the camera effect, right? That would be pretty cool. What's mesh? Not something we want to use in this one, huh? So hemisphere looks pretty nice. If we put it on the right axis and point it towards camera, that'd be pretty cool. So we could do that. What would we want to do with the hemisphere? Anything with the radius? Well, we don't know yet. Let's get before we worry about it. The thing I worry about is if we create a cube. Oh yeah, these are all like 1-1 cubes, which are too big. So what can we do to change that? Well, that would be there. Let's right click, reset transform. So the cube's in the center next to the emitter. Then we can so that looks kind of fun, right? It breaks and shatters towards the camera. These cubes are a bit big though. So let's go ahead and see if we can find something to scale. Um, that wouldn't be. Thought there was one here. Sometimes you have to really look for things because you just can't find it. Force over lifetime, color over lifetime. Lights, trails, uniform mesh. So since there's no size directly, what that makes me think is that I probably did something like creating a, which sounds like me, is to create a parent object. Um, which might be called something like cost part system. It's a custom single emission part. Um, and I might just scale this object down. Lock constraints. So something like 0.3, so I might relabel that to like 0.4. That's not looking bad, right? And then it just shatters out, so that's pretty good. So when the more opaque glass breaks, so let's actually drag this up just to see what it might look like. Um, Actually, I want to fade that out a little bit. That looks too solid. I want it very visible, but I don't want it to look too solid. How is it already looking really solid at 78? when the ball was so transparent before. It's weird. So maybe 100. 100 looks fairly good because this guy's at what? 40? So then if we just go back to our custom particle systems, click on our emitter, it'll start playing again. And you'll see this little box here. Pause, restart, stop, all the fun stuff. Resimulate, show only selected, different options here if you had like a combined particle systems. So this looks nice for the most part. The one thing it's not doing is we haven't hooked it up to our other breaking brick yet, which would be done in a separate programming thing. We're just gonna play around with the particle system here because we got our template down for the most part. Once we have cool things to add on, we so shape, velocity over lifetime, hemisphere, random, texture. Then we have velocity over lifetime, size over lifetime if we wanted them to get bigger or smaller over the time that they're existing. But for this is probably not that great of an idea because they already look like they're getting bigger as they come towards the camera. If they got smaller as they came towards the camera, that would make no sense because it's this piece coming from this cube. Rotation over lifetime, that might be fun. So we have to enable it with the check mark. You can see already they're kind of rotating kind of nicely. I actually really like that already. Um, Again, keep things constant. Don't introduce too much randomness and that sort of thing because it's going to be hard to fix if you have to do programming to change it later. I was just kind of interested if, yeah, 25. So what is 30 then? Just keeps getting more tilted, so maybe 45 is fine. It starts spinning pretty good. It's looking fine. It's probably okay to leave there. So what happens from here if we keep going? We can look at rotation speed. I'm not really interested in that. It might look cool, but I'll just leave it alone. External force. I think that's one that's more used in emission by distance change or something. Noise, collision. If you want to add noise, you can add noise. I'm not going to add noise. I don't really like the way it looks when I add noise anyway. There's other assets I've seen that work pretty good. You can add lights to it. I'm not seeing the. I might do something. Range multiplier. Oh, that didn't really do anything. Range intensity. It's not really doing much either. That cool effect I thought was just more random. As they overlap, they created the creator spot. It's fine. You can add trails. Hmm. Yeah, there's the other thing. You might want a material that has some trails that you can use, otherwise it just ends up with this generic thing. I think if we go down to trail material, though, we can actually trail material right here under render. There's trail material. Let's just throw in breakable brick for right now. You can see that changed it, so it is still just a line, which isn't great. Um, that's kind of high opacity for what it is. So maybe we should go and duplicate this and rename it something, and then we'll call it like, um, what was it? Breaking brick. Maybe we'll call it brick trail. Because we're not going to be moving the bricks around and stuff, so there's not going to be a different kind of trail. Let's go here, come back down to the bottom again, and set that render material to brick trail. And let's brick trail, and also just go here and make it even more transparent. So maybe like 14. So it's, oh, and you notice when we hit play, it looks a little bit different. That looks terrible. So maybe our in studio view here looks a little bit, all right, so maybe we do pump that one back up to 175. So the brick RM, let's pump that up to 175, which I think is pretty decent for opacity. Brick breaking RM needs to be a little bit less than that, so maybe let's try 100. And brick trail can be like 50. See what that looks like in play mode. Because play mode's going to be more accurate. It's not looking great. Part of that could be the lighting, though. So let's go ahead and what's the cube got? He has brick RM, and the emitter has braking and trail. So it's looking a little dark. Why would that be? It'd be partly our scene's fault too. But these match the rest of our scenes. 80%, unless they don't. Which if my light window wasn't open, maybe we didn't. No, it's there. It's just these ones are a little more solid probably because they're full default, which would be 100% opacity. And it's just that having them at low opacity with no lights isn't looking very good. So what do we do about that? Oh, whoops. That's not what I wanted. Hmm. There we go. If you double click, if you double click a tab, it full screens it, and if you double click a tab again, it goes back. There we go. So now that we know that, a little bit about our lighting, we might even want to create not a directional light, because that'll apply to the whole scene, right? Um, well, I could show something I like in the built-in render pipeline, which is if we go to manager and we go to um we probably want to go to registry, yep. And then if I want to go search and I go post-processing stack. So this is the Unity post-processing stack for the UR, or not the URP. This is their post-processing stack for the built-in render pipeline, which is what Unity creates by. Um, and I use this just because it's more what is it, performant than URP because it's technically still a lower resolution. So if we install that, yeah, that'll work nicely. Yep, just open that. So if I double tap that, you guys should have been able to see this remove key over here, which it looks like is still slightly outside of viewport. Oh well. Anyway, so this post-processing stack, go ahead and install it. It's already downloaded by default. Or maybe just because I use it so much, probably that one. Probably just because I use it a lot. If you install it, it has to reload the domain. Let's go to the package manager. And so why did we install that, huh? Well, if I go to, there's a cool little thing where if you go to your main camera, right? So this is kind of why they started moving to URP and some of the other ones as well. It's a little harder to do if you have like a project where you use, and that's why you shouldn't use tags for much, or not tags, what is it? That's why you should be careful when aligning your layers. It doesn't have anything to do with the system. So if I go back to my emit test, right? Main camera. So in the inspector, you'll see this layer, and this layer is default, which you should try and avoid having anything on the default layer. So I'm just going to go add a layer quick. I'm going to call this, I'm going to go to layer 31. I'm just going to call it cam glow for demonstration. If we go back to the main camera then, since we created that, we can select cam glow. Now why am I creating a layer? I need a very specific layer that does a very specific one thing. So you could probably call this something like camera effects, but depending on how your project is set up, it might be better to just, if you're only using glow, just label it glow. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to our render materials. I'm just going to go but select all four, so click and shift click. And we're going to go up here and I'm going to select one little thing of emission, have it emit its bright white normal color. So now that that emits, right? That's cool. That's going to emit a color. It's going to be a little bit brighter, a little more solid, but it doesn't fully solve the problem that I wanted, which was to create more light in the scene, make the glass shine. So to do something similar to that, what would we want to do? Well, we want to save. Now that we have saved, so cam glow, and then current particle systems, let's go ahead and change that to cam glow as well. Yes, change children. Now the reason the post-processing, so the reason for this being that post-processing needs to see that indeed they are on the same layer, and the camera needs to know that it is also on the same layer, else this does not work. So let's go ahead and go to the post-processing, right? So if we add a post-processing, need a layer, and this is the thing that sits on the camera and tells us what to use, right? Layer. Well, we can't apply this to nothing. We have to apply it to cam glow or some other object on this layer on this list. So then where do we go? So we have anti-aliasing. We can turn anti-aliasing on. FXAA, if you're doing mobile, that's the only one you should be using. Run it on fast mode. Sure, keep the alpha. Stop NAN progression propagation. Might turn that on for AR and VR both like have that off. I mean, have that selected. Toolkit and custom effect sorting. So let's go back to our particle system. Now let's continue this on the main camera actually. So then we have a layer. Now we need a volume. So what's a volume do? Well, it is global. We can make it global, that's fine. Weight, priority, profile. Here's the thing we want. So we want a new profile because we don't have one. So we create a new profile. It names it automatically and puts it in emit test profiles. Okay, so it went and it looked at the scene, said test on, or said the scene name underscore profiles. That's cool. So main camera profile. Let's add an effect. So by default, I guess you're supposed to be able to add more to these, which is why there's only the Unity one. I'd assume you'd have to be able to add more later. So we have depth of field, lens distortion, chromatic aberration. That's super popular. Not what we're looking at though. Color grading, which would be really cool for mini-map type ideas. I see those quite often for mini-maps. Looks pretty nice. Vignette, grain, screen space reflections. Don't know how useful that would be. Lens distortions, ambient inoculation. We'll be using bloom. Now we're going to add an effect. Nope, we're just going to open up the bloom. Clamp. Diffusion. Abnormic ratio. Color. So don't turn that on unless you have a very specific thing that you want everything to blue. Fast mode. Because I think you have to select the color here if you have color on, which doesn't help you out enough a lot. There's the dirtiness, which is the texture, and the intensity of 0. So here's your effect. We can add more effects, but we're only going to be using bloom. And keep in mind that all of these effects will apply over all objects on the layer. So if you think about it, if you put something like vignette, it won't necessarily affect it. Or lens distortion shouldn't either. But yeah, if I select this, you also see you can turn it on and off. Um, but if I add more effects, like motion blur, certain kinds of auto exposure and color grading, if it doesn't directly only affect the camera, it affects how the objects on the layer are going to be changed. That means they'll have all of these different effects on them. So a vignette wouldn't necessarily affect the light emitting from our particles, but some of these other ones might. Now we don't want that to take place. So just keep in mind which effects you're using, which I think most of them only apply to the camera and don't apply to how objects are emitting. But something to keep in mind as you move through your different particle effects. So if we have can glow and we have main camera can glow, so then these things should glow when they're spawned. And this is going to take a bit more processing. If anyone can hear my fan speeding up to match it. Oh, and I didn't turn off the times. Mm. Well, darn. Well, hopefully you could see through it most of it. It's not that high of an opacity, but main camera, particle system. We're still just looking through some things. Um, that's most of it. So if we look at our objects again, or not our objects, our materials, um, yeah, that's all just nice and wrapped up. And it should be fade, which is gonna, emission is turned on, the color is white. We could probably up the amount of glow, which where's glow at? I don't think it was visible enough, so I'm gonna go ahead and go back to materials. Um, it's gotta be, let's just start at the top. Start at the top, materials. Where's the chroma? Well, let's just find it this way, I guess. Let's process in there. There we go. It's in scenes for some reason. Okay. So if we look at this, just turn the intensity. Oh, it's at 0. So let's put it at 10, and then run it. See what you see. Okay. Let's try it 100. Oh, and you can see it in preview here. So maybe let's try 50. Yeah, you can see that really getting bright. And maybe that's partly a problem for the material. So if we're all here and we're doing, what do we want? So this is going to be the brick, right? Can we can't adjust our, okay. So maybe we turn our, not that, but this down. So now what does that look like? Wow, shiny. Is that what we wanted? So let's check our cube. Our cube is using the brick break, or the brick RM material. Let's try turning this off and just see what our cube looks like. Okay, so playing with this a bit might be kind of a thing to do, where you're just moving stuff around and doing that sort of thing, and seeing what your opacity is. 'Cause I haven't played around with how the opacity affects the glow. Um, so maybe if our goal is like 175, right? If we liked how opaque that was, if we liked how opaque that was, right, at 175, maybe then we want to go to our camera, because it's in scenes, right? Maybe. But we go here, and maybe we just want to turn that down to maybe 25. It's a bit more manageable, right? So then we play it and see what happens, right? And we'll get the cube because we didn't turn that back on. What do we get that way? It's looking pretty good. It's looking pretty shiny here still. So it's more likely because of the emitter, right? It's got a bunch of little cubes that's instantiating here and pushing them out. And this is only going to play when we break the brick. So it's probably also pretty good. We still want to look at our materials, our render materials, and alter down our, well, these aren't very opaque, actually. And they're still shining a lot. So that's probably fine. It's just surprising that that's so bright there. But if it's emitting like supposed to be glass pieces, that's probably fine too, huh? Would like to maybe change the tail. What's the trails? Distribute per second, repeat per second. Now we can probably look at, so this was play. and it doesn't loop, so it'll create those objects and then it'll stop. And if we want to do delay, or here we go, start size. There we could have done, you could have also adjusted it from here. Now you'll see your particles are smaller. Instead of changing the scale of the object that's emitting them, you could have, or we could have changed just the start size, which 0.5 doesn't look too bad either. Um, I'm actually going to change that back to 0, or back to 1. Back to 1 it be. Start size, start speed. I'm going to bump these up a little bit. They just seem really slow. Oh, that doesn't need to be above 5. And start rotation, flip rotation. There is supposed to be a burst, which might be an emission. Let's do a count of 30. So we have a burst at time, count, probability, interval. Now, at time. So this might be the reason why I've been using, oh, this might be the reason why I've been using the, just upping the emission rate and then turning it on and off the code. It's pretty easy, and so if we hit play, I have looping turned off, so then it plays and it stops, and then time resets once it stops. So maybe using burst would be a better idea. So if you change, if I were to change that, I could change that spark thing that I was working on earlier. And we can totally turn off the emission of normal. So that can go to 0. Now we play. And you'll see that. And maybe we want to change the lifetime. Let's change that up to like 15. Let's change this down to 1. Okay. Maybe let's also turn trails off. Just because I'm not feeling them anymore. They don't seem to look really cool. I don't know why I did that. So that's that one. It runs out. Then we hit play. Still seems kind of long. Playback time. So maybe we want to just shorten that duration of like, maybe I also want it to be 1. That's a little bit better. Then what would we want to do? I kind of want to adjust this. So max particles, if I just put 0 in here. Oh, it doesn't think about it too hard. Because I know duration, like this stuff correlates and will help you fill in times if you want to just put in, like if I put in zeros for duration, it's going to correct to 0.05. which would be how long the objects are going to last for. No, I think that might be a minimum. Okay, so you just need to make sure your things line up, I guess, and then you can add some start rotation, but I wanted to lower the max particles to, what is it? We're looking at 50 here, right? So it's not going to create more than 50. So if I do 50, it should work just fine. I'm going to put that back at 0 and see how it behaves. So that's looking pretty good. So what if we hit play? What does that render? Pop. Pretty good, doesn't it? Yeah. So now it's got a little bit of glow. It's got a little bit of that brick RM. Let's see what in play mode we can. We can change our materials. That's one of the few things we can change. So yeah, it's about 150. So if you make things light up, sometimes it's hard to make them transparent as well. So you gotta kind of balance that with what you want for your art style. So that's kind of hard. Um, I'm just gonna turn this on real quick. Here we go. Okay. So we have, was just seeing how opaque it was. Da, da, da. We need to probably just step over and talk. And then we'll probably wrap up early after, half after, and just re-go over those scripts. So what we would need to do in Breakable Brick in order to display our breaking effect, right? Well, we'd probably want something. So break emitter, and if it's our break emitter, we're gonna need we can do particles. So it'd be serialized field, like normal, and then I think this one's a particle system. And particle system, we'll just call it PS, and we're not gonna declare it because it needs to be set in the inspector. So particle system, and then here we need to do PS dot play. I don't know, just tell it to play once. Um, what we probably need to do is, hmm, so we'd probably want to spawn some type of particle effect object, right? Which would be an instantiation, because if we just play it, you can already see where our problems are going to be, right? Because you play this, and while you start play, then you immediately start destroying. Well, that's going to destroy the particle system if it's on this brick object, right? Which isn't what we want. We want it to play even though the brick is destroyed. So if we get rid of that, right, what can we do? So we probably don't want to do this here. What we'd want to do is have like a game object that is probably PS prefab. So having a serialized game object prefab, we could then, since this is going to be on the brick object itself, we can then call it to instantiate. So and it's instantiate, and what are we instantiating? The prefab, and I also want to get the component, what's of type being particle system construction dot play. This meaning I instantiate the object, I hit play, and then that effect will play. There's probably another thing where we would probably actually have to create a mono behavior if it plays the thing and then stops. Um, so if we think that way, that might actually be more work instantiating this game object. So it might be better to actually reference this component and keep it on, do a coroutine. Either way, it's actually going to be a lot of work to spawn and play this object. So maybe we won't cover that in this art stream. Yeah, because in fact it is going to be a bit uh that I might not be up to in the morning after not turning off the subscription canvas. So flipping back to Unity, so we have a couple different materials, all of them white. Probably be better but we don't want to change them. So maybe something to do would be to create folders and throw like, maybe this will be the brick folder. Brick folder, just throw all these guys in there. Then we create empty folder. Oh. And when you move stuff around in a project, it doesn't break the references in Unity, but it does break references if you're moving scripts for Visual Studio. So if you're a programmer moving code around, just be sure you know that it will um, affect the path, and you might have to close some tabs on Visual Studio and then open the script again through Unity. Which isn't too bad, but it's just kind of it's a thing. Because yeah, so programming that would be that way. For the most part, I think we're looking pretty good. We got our mission set up, we got our burst running, ring buffer mode. Not sure we need to use that. We got some play effects. And actually, since we were talking about maybe using a coroutine to do that thing, we won't want this parent object here because we want to get the component directly. So actually, I might pull that out, delete the custom particle system parent object, and keep this, and then just start size. Because I think we can just play this now, right? That's pretty good. We might even want to lower it a little bit. Let's pull it to like 0.25 and then play it. That's 4 maybe. That looks better. And we could have two different effects. So like there could be one that's like, let's go down to our effect actually. That'd be kind of cool. So we could have this one be a normal one, right? Like say the hit effect, right? Let's rename it. So let's call it hit effect, right? Hit. And we'll call this destroy effects. Then we destroy effects. So then there's the destroy effects. We're looking at that. Duration, short. So if we hit play, let's make a bigger burst maybe. Let's go really big. So there's 50 objects, there's 100, supposedly. It does look like a lot more, but it doesn't feel like a lot more. Um, Anyways, then we could go into code and do a play effect. Because now we can be, um, let's just walk it back. So now we have this one, yep. And I'll call it hit underscore hit PS hit PS dot play. I'll actually not put that there. Not in that. I want to do it in break because this runs every time it takes damage. So then that will work. And then we can go back to Unity. Oops. Did that save? Looks like it saved. And then to Unity, we go ahead and we open our brick prefab. And if we open our brick prefab, we can go to assets, materials, render materials, and we'll give him the brick RM so he can render correctly. And then we'll give him a particle system, which we didn't prefab yet. So we need to go back to scenes. Let's pull in our hit effects in a reasonable place. So prefabs, hit custom effect, right? And then let's go to the brick. And we can pull in hit custom effect, right? And then here we can go down and add his particle system. So now if we go to scenes, and we hit play, well, it won't do anything different because we didn't go to a different scene. Just gotta go assets, scenes, stage 1, 2, emit test. We probably want to go to start menu, just hit play so we can see how it goes. So it's gonna pop up, we hit start, and you can see the thing starting. It's just really short, but you can kind of see it start to play. I think if we turned on, I changed the brick in that stage 1 to have more hits. So there's 15, so it's going to be 15 plays. Um, hmm. It looks like it only plays once. I think that's because we might also pause it if it's in the middle. Um, or just because it hasn't finished yet, because it's like 1 second, and that moves really fast, that ball. There's also some other ones. So there's like, yeah, and we can set all the things that you've seen in there. It's just in the particle effect, it's just easier to do it through the inspector a little bit, and then also trying to set two values at the same time for some of those, like the ones you can set for between two constants. It's very hard to get from to set from in here. It's just a little harder. So I was hoping that start would have been a method, like start playing or play from beginning. Because I know that that's a method for clips. But anyway, so you're gonna play effect like that. Actually, I just walk it back, right? Oh, good. Yep. So then you can play an effect when you hit the object, right? I suppose if I put it outside on break brick 2, it would work. But any rate, that works pretty well. So I'm gonna just walk over the code again that I had up for the beginning, just so it's a little more visible. I think I talked through it pretty well, but I just want to make sure with those things off screen that people can see it. It's the score display mono behavior protected text. So in score display, I just made a class of mono behavior that has using TMP Pro and then using TMP text as a serialized protected field called score text. This allows you to edit and connect what the text field is that's displaying. This is a good one to get used to, especially if you ever do input fields. Then we have serialized protected string, pretext, and I set it with a default value of a score string, or of a string saying score with a colon, and this is our post. And in start, we change our score, which change score is just updating the score based on the game manager's player score. This is also called in game manager every time score is added. I just did this because I wanted the types to work out correctly. So with that, we move into the scene management part that I moved into this game manager. We have next scene, scene manager, dot get active scenes, dot build index +1. So this is getting what the next scene should be. This is checking if that's outside the range of the build index. So scene manager dot scene count in build settings -1, meaning the index, the last index that is in. And if it is, then it loads 0 because you have completed the round, completed the challenge. And then we have scene manager load next scene. So if we hit scene manager dot load next scene, that's if we don't have one outside the range. We can just load the next scene. And then if the next scene is equal 1, reset the score. Which might not run based on this. Because if we go else, load scene, well then, well it is working because we do get zeros. So that is working. So scene manager.load doesn't necessarily stop code from running in the method that it's calling. It's just destroy that does that. Let's start scene. And this is just to take us back to the start scene. We load 0, which is the first index. This stayed the same. Player score is now a public getter, just so that we can get that without having access issues, and also allowing people to directly change what the variable is. Breakable brick didn't change a whole lot. We continued to not use anything that removed it from something else. We had a game manager instance add score, um, adding a point value that we gave to it, just being something that the designer can. That's good. Paddle and ball script and all that stuff didn't really change. Game enter is just a little thing we put on the bottom floor block so that the paddle moving over it, as long as the ball hits the paddle, that's fine. But if the ball hits the floor, then it sends you back to scene 0. Um, and it does that just by telling the game manager to start scene. And there's still a little bit of polish. Oh, in round manager, we moved the scene changing stuff out, and we changed this line just to be round manager types, because it was game objects, whether it was going too fast or the autocomplete isn't correct. End round is still working. Debug.log, this is just a debug statement, doesn't need to be here. But this is still the same as when I was trying to test it because something about removing object IDs from a list doesn't work very well. So I just did this as a cheat fix. So I find objects by type, breakable brick, get the length, and if it's less than 1, we know that we need to turn the canvas on. Cool. Right? And then in awake, didn't change any of that from the last one. and then we just run end round every update because it was faster to do it that way. It would have required a lot more work to use an integer and stuff, and we're looking to get you a template ended today. So game manager, did that one, that one. Canvas nav, we moved all of the scene loading into the game manager as you saw earlier, and then we game manager.instance.next scene. So it just calls up to the game manager and asks it to load the next scene. Same with this one, start scene. And then, so that one got really simplified. There's not even any variables in it anymore. And then what do we do from there? So accessors don't have any. And with that, there's a fully functioning system, should be. If it decides it wants to load, come on. There we go. And then all we had to do was go into our canvases and connect the broken links. Since we changed that one method to not take any parameters in Scene Manager, or not in Scene Manager. In the scene loading for Canvas now, we just needed to reconnect that. Where was that? I'm on the wrong objects. Yeah. So on the button, we just selected that new one from the same object. So the canvas nav, load scene, and then text. We added one to this panel so that you can see it when this canvas is active. And score canvas. We added one to this object and linked it to this text. To do it to the text only. So that would look like adding this score display, adding its own text object, and then you can edit these to say whatever you want. And then we have event system. Just make sure you have one. In every scene you have a canvas. And then everything is good if you do those couple things to each of the scenes. And now we have a particle effect that plays when we hit the brick object. Which there's still more to do on that type of effect, and maybe I'll do a separate thing on that later. But that will be it for this playlist, this type of tutorial. So it gives you the paddle, game cycle, and it's pretty linear, no stage selection. And plenty of option to customize it as we went over the moving the camera around. So not on this one, but on this one, which I'm actually going to throw it back to orthographic probably. So with that one, we're gonna end a little bit early. So where is this? It's on. So with that, if you find these videos helpful, remember to like and subscribe. We do Tuesday code, 6 p.m. Thursday variable content, 6 p.m. And Saturday, 10 a.m. We'll be continuing art. So make sure to check those out. And as always, Have a bug-free day.